Hello and welcome to today's how-to video. Today's episode we're looking at lead belaying and in particular how to do it safely and appropriately, as well as a few tips to do with your stance, position, and then what to do if you've got big weight differences between your climber and your belayer. With any kind of belaying, it's important to maintain one hand on the dead rope at all times. So whether that's bottom roping, top roping, or lead belaying, one hand always on the dead rope. With lead belaying, make sure, for instance, your right hand is on the dead rope, your left hand is on the live end of the rope, and as you pay out rope, it's doing it in one continuous motion, so both hands are working together to move the live rope and feed that dead rope through the belay to produce a little bit of slack for your lead climber to actually climb with. So with the lead belaying, it's very important that as you're paying out the rope, you're very attentive to your climber. So making sure you can see when they actually need rope, so you can pay out a little bit of rope just as they're bringing it up to the quick draw. Also want to make sure that you don't have too much rope, i.e. there's not so much slack on the floor that should your climber fall off, they're going to end up with quite a long fall and potentially a ground fall. Likewise, equally, you don't want to have it too tight so that when they're actually climbing, they're fighting against you and the belay, trying to drag up the rope with them. That's very uncomfortable for the lead climber. So with the amount of rope that you actually have in the system, the amount of slack that you have, it needs to be enough so that the climber can move around freely, so that they can climb up, take a step up without having to be pulled back by the rope, but also not so much that they're on for a big whipper should they fall off, or even a potential ground fall. So belaying stance. When you're belaying, especially when you're on the ground, do make sure that your stance is strong enough that should your climber fall off, you've got some chance of actually bracing against the fall. And the best way to do this is to have one foot in front of the other, rather than two together. So one foot in front of the other gives your forward leg a bit more of a brace position should your climber come off and you actually get pulled forward a little bit. The best way to do this is if you have, say, your right hand on the dead rope, the opposite leg should be further forward. So if my right hand is on the dead rope, my left leg is further forward in a brace position. When your climber first leaves the floor, it's very important, because you're not actively belaying them at this point, there's no ropes and bolts, to actually spot them for their first couple of moves up until the point where they clip the first runner. And in that instance, that's when the belay kicks in and you can take over with belaying as opposed to spotting. In those first initial moves, when you've got a bolt clipped, or even the second bolt clipped, the climber is very close to the ground, they're very close to the initial section of the rope between you and the first bolt. If you stand too far back, you create an angle between the first bolt, the rope, and yourself as the belayer. In which case, if the climber falls off, they're going to land potentially on that rope and cause a bit of rope burn. The best thing to do for them is to stand off to the side of the bolt and tuck yourself up right against the wall as well. That way, should they come off in those first few moves, they're going to have a clean fall, not with the rope in the way and not with yourself in the way either. So, should the worst happen and your climber falls off, in the lead climbing situation, a lot more force is generated than the bottom roping situation, so you're more likely to be pulled forward. So even if you're equal weights, potentially you'll get pulled a little bit further forward. That's where your brace position comes in handy. Also, because if you've been using the correct method and you've got your hand already semi-locked off and down below as you feed the rope through, your hand hopefully will already be in a locked off position. Maintain that locked off position as the climber falls, so that you can arrest their fall properly. What if you've got two climbers who are completely different weights, i.e. a heavy climber and quite a small light climber? So in this instance, when the heavier climber falls off, the lighter climber, no matter how braced they are, they're going to get pulled forward and potentially pulled up into the wall. So they've got to be ready for that and ready to brace themselves with their feet as opposed to their hands and letting go of the rope. To combat that, if you have got a very light belayer compared to a much heavier climber, you could use a variety of different things. There is a device called the Ohm, which is a resistor that you put to the first bolt, and we'll be exploring that one in a later video. That helps reduce the force impacted on the light belayer. You could use a sandbag if some climbing walls have sandbags. You can clip the belayer to the sandbag, gives them a bit of extra ballast as they get pulled towards the wall a bit, and hopefully not pulled straight into the wall. The other scenario where you've got a much lighter climber and a heavier belayer. So in this instance, the scenario being where the heavier climber would have come off and actually pulled the smaller belayer into the wall. That creates what's known as a soft catch. So as the heavier climber falls, because the belayer is getting pulled in a bit, the rope actually gets let out a little bit, enough so that it cushions the fall so that the climber doesn't slam into the wall. In the opposite scenario where the light climber comes off, because it's so much lighter, if the belayer were to arrest the fall and lock it off completely, that opens up the climber to basically coming off, the rope going tight, and then them slamming into the rock, into the wall. To prevent that situation, where obviously you can injure yourself quite badly in that scenario, is to give the climber a soft catch. So the belayer actively has to move forward as the climber falls and the rope comes tight as they're falling. This can happen in two ways. If it's close to the floor, then just moving forward a little bit to give them a little bit of a cushion, so that you're obviously not going to allow them to deck out. If they're high enough up and you think they're on for quite a whipper, rather than to reduce the impact that fall is going to have, to try and almost let out a little bit of rope, or even move much further forward towards the wall to give them that much softer catch. Hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. If you've got any questions about it, then do drop us a line in the comment section. We'll try and answer as many questions as we can. As always, if you're in any doubt or you're unsure of any of the things and you want a little bit more tuition, it's best to hire in a mountain instructor.